The afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains of Evelyn Washington's modest living room, casting gentle shadows across the wall where her military commendations hung in perfect formation. At 72, she maintained the same precision that had defined her 40-year Army career. Every medal aligned, every photograph positioned with purpose. The Distinguished Service Medal gleamed beside images of her commanding troops in places most civilians couldn't pronounce. The shrill ring of her landline shattered the peaceful silence. General Washington? The voice belonged to Mrs. Chen, her neighbor of 15 years. Panic threaded through every word. There's something terrible happening at Community General. Police cars, ambulances. People are saying there's been some kind of incident. The whole neighborhood's talking about it. Evelyn's weathered hands tightened around the receiver. Even in retirement, the instinct to respond to crisis remained as sharp as her pressed uniform once was. What kind of incident, Margaret? Nobody knows for sure. Some folks think it might be related to that new policy about visitor restrictions. You know how they've been treating our people lately. Mrs. Chen's voice dropped to a whisper. I thought maybe, with your experience. The unspoken request hung between them. Evelyn understood. In a community where authority figures often looked past black faces, her decades of leadership carried weight that transcended retirement. She had spent her life serving a country that hadn't always served people who looked like her, breaking through barriers that shouldn't have existed in the first place. I'll head over there, Evelyn said, already reaching for her simple gray cardigan draped over the armchair. Her comfortable walking shoes sat by the door, practical and unassuming, nothing that would announce her distinguished past to casual observers. As she gathered her keys, Evelyn caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman staring back bore the quiet dignity of someone who had commanded respect in rooms where she was often the only person of color, the only woman. Her silver hair was neat, her posture straight despite her years. She had no idea that within the hour, that same dignity would be tested in ways she never imagined possible. The parking lot of Community General Hospital buzzed with tension as Evelyn pulled her modest sedan into a space near the emergency entrance. 3 patrol cars sat with lights flashing, their red and blue strobes painting the concrete in urgent colors. A small crowd had gathered near the main doors, voices rising in animated discussion. Evelyn approached with the measured stride that had once carried her across military compounds worldwide. She could see 2 officers near the hospital's entrance. A tall, broad-shouldered white man with graying temples and a younger Hispanic officer whose hand rested casually on his radio. "Excuse me, officers," Evelyn said, her voice carrying the natural authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "I'm here about the disturbance. I'd like to speak with whoever's in charge." Officer Bradley, the older of the 2, barely glanced in her direction. His eyes swept over her gray cardigan and comfortable shoes with obvious dismissal. "Ma'am, you need to step back. This is police business." "I understand that," Evelyn replied, maintaining her composure. "I'm retired military, and I have experience with crisis management. Perhaps I could assist with de-escalation." Officer Martinez looked up from his notepad, his expression skeptical. "Military? What branch?" "United States Army. I served for 40 years, retiring as—" "Look, lady," Bradley interrupted, his tone growing sharper. "I don't know what you think you saw on TV, but this isn't a game. We've got reports of suspicious activity, and we don't need civilians getting in the way." The dismissal stung more than Evelyn cared to admit. She had faced this before, the automatic assumption that her presence was unwelcome, that her words carried no weight. But never quite like this, never with such blatant disregard for basic courtesy. "Officer, I'm simply trying to help my community," she said, her voice steady despite the frustration building in her chest. "If you would just listen—" "Are you a patient here?" Martinez asked, his pen poised over his notepad. "Because if you're not, you need to move along. We've got enough confusion without adding more." Evelyn felt the familiar weight of being seen but not heard, of having her very presence questioned simply because of the color of her skin. They weren't listening to her words. They were only seeing an elderly black woman who, in their minds, didn't belong in their sphere of authority. The realization settled over her like a cold shadow, preparing her for the confrontation that was about to unfold. The cold shadow of dismissal only strengthened Evelyn's resolve. She straightened her shoulders, drawing upon decades of experience in hostile rooms where her authority had been questioned by men who looked exactly like these officers. "I need to speak with the hospital administrator," she said, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of command. "There are community concerns about recent policies here, and as someone with experience in institutional management, I believe I can help address them constructively." Bradley's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, I'm not going to tell you again. You need to leave. Now." "I'm not leaving until I understand what's happening here," Evelyn replied, her dignity intact despite the growing hostility. "This hospital serves my neighborhood, and I have every right to—" "Right." Bradley stepped closer, his voice rising. "You're giving me attitude, lady. That's what you're giving me." Martinez moved to flank her, his hand now resting on his belt. "She's being resistant, Brad. Look at her. Thinks she's in charge here." The words hit Evelyn like physical blows. Resistant, attitude, the same coded language that had followed her throughout her career, used to diminish black women who dared to speak with authority. She had commanded thousands of soldiers, advised Pentagon officials, led missions in combat zones. Yet here she stood, being treated like a common troublemaker. "Officers, if you would simply allow me to show you my identification," Evelyn began, slowly reaching into her cardigan pocket where her military ID and credentials rested. "Gun!" Martinez shouted, his hand flying to his weapon. "She's reaching for something." "No," Evelyn said firmly, her hands now visible and empty. "I was reaching for my identification. I am a retired United States Army general and I—" But Bradley was already moving, his handcuffs gleaming in the afternoon light. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." "This is completely unnecessary," Evelyn said, her voice steady even as the metal clicked around her wrists. The sound echoed across the parking lot like a gunshot, drawing gasps from the growing crowd of onlookers. Hospital staff pressed against the windows, their faces masks of shock and disbelief. A nurse covered her mouth with her hands. An orderly pulled out his phone, fingers trembling as he began recording. As Bradley tightened the handcuffs, Evelyn turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting his with unwavering dignity. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the quiet power of someone who had stared down far more dangerous enemies than these two men. "You have no idea who you're arresting." The words hung in the air like a prophecy, witnessed by dozens of people who would never forget this moment. The prophecy of Evelyn's words followed her into the sterile fluorescent hell of the police station, where her dignity was systematically stripped away with bureaucratic efficiency. Desk Sergeant Murphy barely looked up from his paperwork as Bradley and Martinez brought her in. "What VE we got?" Murphy asked, his voice flat with the boredom of routine. "Disorderly conduct, resisting arrest," Bradley replied, avoiding eye contact with Evelyn. "Elderly black female, causing problems at the hospital." Elderly black female. The reduction of her entire existence to 3 clinical descriptors made Evelyn's stomach clench. She had once briefed Joint Chiefs of Staff on military strategy, had led peacekeeping missions in Bosnia, had been the first black woman to command an entire division. The Distinguished Service Medal in her living room represented a lifetime of breaking barriers and serving with honor. Now she was just another entry in a logbook. The fingerprinting came first, her weathered hands pressed against the digital scanner, each print catalogued like evidence of criminality rather than testimony to decades of saluting the flag. The mugshot followed, the camera's flash harsh and unforgiving as it captured her face from multiple angles. She maintained her composure, refusing to let them see her break. The holding cell was a concrete box painted institutional green, its single bench cold against her back. As she sat in the suffocating silence, Evelyn thought of the soldiers she had commanded in Afghanistan. Young men and women who had looked to her for guidance in the face of mortal danger. She had earned their respect through competence and courage, not through the color of her skin or the assumptions others made about her worth. Detective Marcus Williams paused outside her cell during his evening rounds. Something about the woman's posture caught his attention. The way she sat with perfect military bearing despite her circumstances, the quiet dignity that seemed to radiate from her even in this dehumanizing place. He made a mental note to look into her case more thoroughly, though he couldn't yet articulate why his instincts were telling him something was very wrong. Detective Williams couldn't shake the image of the woman in holding cell 3. Her bearing haunted him through his paperwork, the way she carried herself like someone accustomed to command. Against protocol, he decided to run a comprehensive background check on Evelyn Washington. The computer screen flickered as data populated. Williams leaned forward, his coffee growing cold as line after line of military service records appeared. His eyes widened as he scrolled through commendations, deployments, and promotions spanning for decades. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, staring at her final rank. Brigadier General, United States Army. Meanwhile, 3 miles away, retired Master Sergeant James Rodriguez was fielding frantic phone calls at the Veterans Community Center. As Evelyn's former aide-de-camp and current advocate for local veterans, he had built a network that stretched across the city. "Jimmy, they arrested General Washington," came the breathless voice of Maria Santos, a community organizer who had witnessed the hospital incident. "Handcuffed her like a common criminal." Rodriguez felt his blood pressure spike. "Are you certain?" "Evelyn Washington." "Positive. It's all over social media. Someone recorded the whole thing." Within minutes, Rodriguez's phone was buzzing with calls. Reverend Thomas from Mount Olive Baptist Church was the first to reach him back. "If they can do this to a decorated general, James, what does that say about the rest of us?" The sentiment echoed through every conversation. Dr. Patricia Hayes, president of the local NAACP chapter, was already drafting press statements. "This isn't just about Evelyn," she told Rodriguez during their hurried phone conference. "This is about every black person who's ever been judged by their appearance rather than their character." Evelyn's nephew, Michael Washington, a civil rights attorney in Atlanta, received the news while preparing for court. His hands shook as he listened to the details. "Aunt Evelyn? They arrested Aunt Evelyn?" His voice cracked with disbelief and rage. Back at the police station, Detective Williams stared at his computer screen, reading about the Distinguished Service Medal, the Bronze Star, the commendations from 3 different presidents. His finger hovered over the phone, knowing that the call he was about to make would change everything. The truth was about to explode like a grenade in a room full of people who thought they knew exactly who they were dealing with. The grenade detonated at 8:47 p.m. when Detective Williams burst into Chief Patricia Morrison's office, his face pale with urgency. "Chief, we have a major problem. The woman Bradley and Martinez arrested. She's a retired Army general." Morrison's coffee mug slipped from her fingers, shattering against the floor. "What did you just say?" "Brigadier General Evelyn Washington, Distinguished Service Medal, Bronze Star, 40 years of service. She's been sitting in our holding cell for 3 hours." The chief's face drained of color as she grabbed her jacket. The walk to the holding area felt like a death march, her footsteps echoing through corridors that suddenly seemed too narrow, too suffocating. Bradley and Martinez stood outside the cell when Morrison arrived, their faces reflecting different shades of devastation. Martinez stared at the floor, his hands trembling slightly. Bradley's jaw was set in defensive defiance. "This is a mistake," Bradley muttered. "She was acting suspicious, giving us attitude." "Shut up, Bradley," Morrison snapped, her voice cutting through his excuses like a blade. "Just shut up." Inside the cell, Evelyn sat with the same perfect posture Williams had noticed hours earlier. When the door opened, she rose with fluid grace, her dignity intact despite the institutional humiliation she had endured. "General Washington," Morrison began, her voice thick with mortification, "I am deeply, profoundly sorry for this inexcusable." "Chief Morrison," Evelyn interrupted, her voice steady and commanding. "Your apology, while noted, does not address the systemic failure that led to this moment. I was not arrested because I committed a crime. I was arrested because 2 of your officers saw an elderly black woman and assumed I was a threat." Martinez stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ma'am, we made a terrible mistake. I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover." You're right, Officer Martinez. It doesn't. Evelyn's eyes moved between the three officials. The question now is what you intend to do to ensure this never happens to another member of my community who doesn't happen to have a wall full of military commendations. Outside, the first news van pulled into the parking lot, its satellite dish extending toward the sky like an antenna broadcasting the department's shame to the world. The shame broadcasting from the police station's parking lot spread across the nation within hours. By morning, satellite trucks lined the street like mechanical vultures, their crews hungry for the story that had exploded across social media overnight. The hashtag General Washington trended nationally, accompanied by the devastating video of her arrest. Evelyn stood before the assembled media on the steps of the Veterans Community Center, flanked by Master Sergeant Rodriguez and Reverend Thomas. She had chosen her words carefully, understanding that this moment transcended her personal humiliation. Yesterday, I was arrested not for any crime I committed, but for the crime of existing while black in a space where two officers decided I didn't belong. She began, her voice carrying across the crowd with military precision. But I want to be clear, I am not the victim here. I am the fortunate one. The crowd leaned forward, hanging on every word. I have credentials, commendations, a lifetime of service that eventually secured my release. But what about the countless Black Americans who face this same prejudice without a wall full of medals to protect them? What about the grandmother stopped for looking suspicious in her own neighborhood? The teenager questioned for walking while black? They are the real victims of the system that failed so spectacularly yesterday. Behind the police station's tinted windows, Chief Morrison watched the press conference with growing dread. Officer Bradley sat in her office, his union representative beside him, still insisting his actions were justified. She was acting erratically, he maintained. How was I supposed to know? That's exactly the problem, Morrison replied, her patience exhausted. You didn't know because you didn't listen. You saw what you expected to see. 3 blocks away, Officer Martinez sat in his car outside his daughter's school, watching Evelyn's press conference on his phone. Her words cut through him like shrapnel. He thought of his own mother, a proud Mexican immigrant who had faced similar assumptions throughout her life. He pulled out his phone and dialed the community center. I'd like to volunteer for whatever bias training programs you're developing, he told Rodriguez when the call connected. I need to do better. We all need to do better. The reckoning had begun, rippling outward like stones thrown into still water. The stones Martinez had thrown into still water created ripples that transformed the entire community over the following months. What began as one man's moment of reckoning became a movement that reached far beyond the borders of their small city, touching lives and changing policies across the nation. Evelyn channeled her experience into a force for systemic change, working directly with Chief Morrison to develop comprehensive bias training programs that became a model for departments nationwide. The Washington Protocol, as it came to be known, required officers to complete 40 hours of community immersion training, spending time in neighborhoods they patrolled, learning the stories and struggles of the people they served. We're not just changing procedures, Evelyn explained to a packed auditorium of police chiefs from across the state. We're changing hearts and minds. We're teaching officers to see humanity before they see skin color, to hear voices before they make assumptions. Every Tuesday evening, she held community forums at the Veterans Center, where her voice carried the same authority that had once commanded troops in distant lands. Young activists gathered around her like students around a master, learning how to transform anger into action, how to speak truth to power with dignity intact. The room would fill with faces of every age and background, teenagers with fire in their eyes, middle-aged parents seeking justice for their children, elderly community members who had witnessed decades of struggle. Change doesn't happen overnight, she would tell them, her silver hair catching the light as she gestured toward the photographs of civil rights leaders on the wall. But it happens when ordinary people refuse to accept extraordinary injustice. It happens when we choose courage over comfort, when we choose to stand up rather than stand by. Among her most dedicated students was Marcus Thompson, a 19-year-old college sophomore who had been inspired by her press conference. General Washington taught me that activism isn't about anger, he would later tell reporters. It's about channeling that anger into something constructive, something that builds bridges instead of burning them down. Officer Martinez became one of her most devoted allies, attending every session and eventually becoming a liaison between the department and community organizations. His transformation was remarkable, from the man who had helped arrest her to someone who spoke passionately about implicit bias at police academies across the region. His partnership with Evelyn became a powerful symbol of redemption and growth. "I can't undo what I did," he told a group of rookie officers during one training session, his voice heavy with emotion. "But I can make sure it never happens again. I can make sure you understand what I failed to see, that every person you encounter is someone's mother, father, child. They deserve your respect before they earn it." Officer Bradley, meanwhile, had been reassigned to desk duty pending a full investigation, a consequence that sent a clear message throughout the force. His refusal to acknowledge wrongdoing or participate in bias training ultimately led to his early retirement, a decision that was met with relief rather than sympathy from his colleagues. The policy changes extended beyond the police department. The hospital where Evelyn's ordeal began implemented new protocols for community engagement, establishing a civilian oversight board that included voices from every neighborhood they served. Local schools invited Evelyn to speak about leadership and civil rights, her story becoming part of the curriculum that taught children about standing up for justice. 6 months after her arrest, Evelyn returned to Community General Hospital for a routine checkup. The same staff who had watched her humiliation through windows now greeted her with genuine warmth and respect. Nurses who had once been silent witnesses approached her with apologies and gratitude, thanking her for the changes her courage had brought about. The hospital administrator, Dr. Sarah Chun, Mrs. Chen's daughter and a woman who had grown up hearing stories of Evelyn's quiet leadership in the neighborhood, personally escorted her through the halls. They discussed new policies designed to better serve the community, including a patient advocacy program that ensured every person received dignified treatment regardless of their appearance or background. "Your mother's phone call that day changed everything," Evelyn told Dr. Chun as they walked past the emergency entrance where her arrest had occurred. "Sometimes the smallest acts of caring create the biggest transformations." As she walked toward the exit, past the spot where she had been handcuffed 6 months earlier, Evelyn reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The humiliation had been real, the pain profound, but from that darkness had emerged something beautiful. A community awakened, a system reformed, and a new generation inspired to continue the fight for justice. A young black girl tugged on her mother's sleeve near the hospital's main entrance, pointing excitedly. "Mama, that's the lady from the news, the one who stood up to the police." Evelyn knelt down to the child's level, her eyes twinkling with the same determination that had sustained her through decades of breaking barriers. The little girl couldn't have been more than 7, her hair adorned with colorful barrettes, her school backpack decorated with superhero patches. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Zara," the girl whispered, suddenly shy but unable to look away from this woman she had seen on television, this hero who looked like her. "Well, Zara," Evelyn said, taking the child's small hands in her weathered ones, "remember that your voice matters, no matter how young you are, no matter what anyone tells you. Your voice has power. Use it to speak up for what's right, use it to help others, and never let anyone make you feel small." The little girl nodded solemnly, her eyes wide with understanding that transcended her years. In that moment, Evelyn saw the future she had fought to create. A world where children like Zara would grow up knowing their worth, their power, their right to be heard and respected. As Evelyn stood and watched Zara skip away with her mother, she smiled. The legacy was secure, carried forward in the hearts and minds of a new generation who would never accept injustice as inevitable, who would always remember that change begins with the courage to stand up and say, "You have no idea who you're dealing with."